modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger. The warrior archetype of courage with gracefulness is a metaphor for how much training and perseverance this will take. We notice the different styles of the warrior ego in two successful generals from the Second World War, Dwight Eisenhower and Douglas MacArthur. Eisenhower showed his strength with cooperative humility. MacArthur showed his strength through an individualistic self-confidence that came across as arrogance. Yet, we appreciate that both made sterling and inimitable contributions to our history. An egotistical bravado is meant to be a lesser-used tool in our toolbox, not like the often-needed hammer or screwdriver. It's more like a soldering torch. It's not in use daily or weekly, but only on the rare occasions when it's needed. It's kept for a lifetime, but kept at the bottom of the toolbox. A soldering torch is also a useful metaphor for ego itself, since it is a tool with power to do both good and harm. To make the best use of our soldering torch, we have to learn how to handle it, know when it's the right tool for the job, understand how not to be harmed by it or harm others with it, and be ready to store it when not in use. Likewise, we have to have instant access to our big ego for the occasions that do call for it. Like the soldering torch, an ego mindset is meant to be a tool, never a weapon, with which to burn oneself or others. We control the strike that will ignite it as well as the torch itself. We have to be absolutely in control of when, why, and where we fire it up. That is just what a mature, functional adult gradually learns with respect to when and how to express ego reactions. To carry our analogy further, we notice that a cheaply made soldering torch has only an on-off switch, so when on is pressed, the flame shoots out with full force. A well-made torch has a dial, so the user can modulate the flame. Likewise, an untrained ego is like the cheaper torch that explodes with equal vigor at any provocation. A minor slight evokes the same tantrums that might arise from a major insult. A healthy ego is more like the carefully constructed torch. It has the capacity to adjust and regulate its reactions in accord with the seriousness of the stimulus. We also notice that we use the soldering torch less as we get older. We keep the fixtures in our home in good working order. We replace what's broken rather than continually going back to fix it. In the same respect, as we age and become wiser, we choose a life of tranquility. We learn to avoid circumstances that might require ignition of our oversized ego. We want serenity, but never throw the soldering torch away. Making the best of the dark side. The vanquishing of the devil will not be his non-existence, but his ceasing to be an enemy. Origen, De Principis. The shadow is a Jungian concept referring to the part of us that is disavowed and hidden because it seems too dangerous or embarrassing to show others directly. Our shadow, both positive and negative, comes out as projection. We despise in others the very traits we are too ashamed to admit are in us too. We admire in others the wonderful qualities we don't dare admit we have. Our work is to take back our projections and then avow our traits in ways that bring out their positive possibilities. There is a Tibetan Buddhist practice called chod. It consists of offering ourselves to the demons that plague us as a way of transforming them. this is a metaphor for engaging the possibility of befriending rather than opposing our shadow side in order to release the usefulness in it. Egotism is the negative shadow side of ego. The traits of a haughty ego are negations of an appropriately humble self. The compulsions of a controlling ego are negations of an efficient self that respects the freedom of others. The shadow side of ourselves is unconscious to us. Our egotism then obscures our vision of the damage we do to others and to our own chances for love and connection. Ego, like old Westerns, divides everyone into categories: good guys and bad guys. Its style thrives on division, the bias that other people are evil and we are good. In the larger archetypal world, the ego splits off its own tendencies toward evil by adding a D to it and calling it the devil. To project evil onto Satan is a way of saying evil is transcendent, more than can be accounted for by human choices. That makes sense as a collective archetype, but the devil made me do it can also be a way of avoiding responsibility for our choices. Actually, all of us have the capacity for evil. Some of us activate it. A few are unalterably possessed by it. Many take a stand against it. As we grow in maturity, we realize that we all contain both good and evil inclinations. But in spiritual consciousness, we realize that goodness represents more of who we humans are than evil does. How can we know that goodness is our true nature rather than evil? Here are two explanations that can help us. First, we are not discrete beings, but all interconnected. In fact, our survival depends on our commitment to connectedness. Goodness is thus traceable to the survival needs of the planet. Evil cannot give an accurate or full picture of who we are. We are geared for survival. Evil leads to destruction. It follows, then, that goodness is primary and final in us, though evil remains a potential in us always. Second, evil inclinations are caused by and conditioned by fear, a negative motivation, whereas goodness comes from love, a positive reality. For instance, people who hail from an affirming childhood are much more likely to show goodness, while people who were abused are more likely to hurt others and make malevolent choices. We can awaken to our projections. When we do so, we can see reality as it is, rather than as we configure, expect, or desire it to be. The goal of an evolved consciousness is to take its projections back. Milton's God, in Book 10 of Paradise Lost, does just this when he names the devils my hellhounds. Prospero, in Shakespeare's Tempest, says of the diabolical Caliban, "This thing of darkness I acknowledge mine." Prospero is not dualistically dividing himself from Caliban. He is withdrawing projections, a path to wholeness. All of us contain both dark and light. This is how we are whole, and this is why projections miss the point. To take back projections is an encouraging sign. Our hidden side is full of lively energy. To befriend our shadow is to bring it into consciousness and find the good in it. This is hard for a narcissistic ego to do because it entails acknowledging personal projections rather than blaming others for what is in ourselves. We will have to take responsibility for the truth about ourselves. Finding the value in our dark side is a challenge indeed. Yet as we lighten our leaden ego, we release gold from it, our true nature. We might say that an arrogant ego comes in an ugly wrapper, but the gift inside is precious. We work toward maintaining what is positive in our personality and transforming what is dysfunctional. For instance, our ego, asserting its power over others, can turn into using our power for the welfare of others. Our sense that we are better than others can become a sense of a calling to do more for others. In both instances, we are releasing a positive energy from a negative one, the essence of befriending the shadow. Practice. Making friends with our shadow. How can a trait of egotism be worked with so that it can become ready to enter the service of our true nature with its orientation toward justice, peace, and love? We notice, consult, and then welcome. First, we notice our inflated ego mindset. Second, we consult our true nature that works with ego to tame it. Finally, we welcome the new ego mindset that results from the taming. We've been noticing that our inflated ego operates as a reflex. It is compulsive. Our true nature is patient and reasonable. The new, wholesome mindset immediately rings true. Here is what the notice, consult, welcome style looks like, using the example of the my way style of the egotist. Notice the transformation that is possible for us. My way is the only right way. I'm demanding, controlling, and manipulative in relationships. I have to be acknowledged, honored, and considered first in all circumstances. I have to be given credit and praise, made a fuss over. I am the best. I notice this without judging. 2. I have a lot to offer, and I want to share my ideas and show they make sense. But other people need a voice too, so I will try being open to what others have to offer. I cannot expect others to glorify me if I am to achieve my real goal of growing in mutual respect. I am consulting an oracular wisdom in me beyond ego. 3. I am becoming cooperative and collaborative, not unilateral in my decision-making. I still see myself as important, but I no longer demand that others agree with my assessment. I welcome this new style with gratitude. We can abandon the polarizing idea of good versus bad so that we find a positive dimension in what is negative. Then negative is not wrong, but is like the minus sign in an algebraic equation. It simply advises us to balance the other side so the equation can work. We can explore how our qualities and possibilities can balance out through the following sets of attributes. The first represents the extreme version that becomes negative. The second represents the positive quality that might emerge from that. The third represents the negative quality of that extreme version. And the fourth represents the kernel of value that exists in the negative quality. So, from self-centeredness to self-nurturance, from selfishness to self-respect, from rigidness to groundedness, from instability to openness, from codependency to loving kindness, from aggression to assertiveness, from foolhardiness to courage, from fear-based thoughts and actions to caution, from excessive self-revealing to candidness, from mendacity to imaginativeness, from lack of boundaries to respect for others' freedom, from control to the ability to get things done or to lead, from toleration of abuse to patience, from entitlement to standing up for one's rights, from gullibility and naivete to trust, from paranoia to wise discernment of others' motives. Notice that the positive qualities are the kernels of value within the extreme versions of themselves. Likewise, the kernels of values are ways to balance the extreme versions of the positive qualities. Thus, we can trust that we are all full of equations, not polarities. Every quality of ego is fully transformable. All it takes is relating to each quality with compassion and gentleness. Then they reveal something new, like a shabby wallet that nonetheless contains a gold coin. What we hide from ourselves makes it dark. The darkness conceals, but can't eliminate the gold. Each quality is waiting, even longing, to have its essential value be released. Giving the 5 A's to our shadow side helps us navigate this wonderful option. Attention. We notice what we think, say, and do, and we pay close attention to our strong reactions. Strong admiration of or attachment to others leads us to look at our own untapped potential. Strong repulsion by or dislike of others leads us to look at our own unacceptable impulses. We look mindfully, that is, as witnesses, not as juries. A sound, in the first instant in which we hear it, is only sound. We instantly interpret it with a name, a reason, and so forth. This is how it loses its actuality, its unique reality in the moment. Acceptance. We accept our feelings, impulses, desires, and fears with compassion and without shame. I accept these inclinations as natural to me. I love myself as I am. I am not giving up on myself because of them. With this style of self-understanding, we undermine shame about who we are. Rather, who we are at our worst becomes an opportunity for awakening. This is how our limitations and shortcomings begin to reveal their value to us. Now, all we have to do is refashion and redirect them so they become wholesome. For instance, as we accept that we are controlling in relationships, we can let go of that style, but keep the assertiveness and initiative in it. Now, we are strong in maintaining our boundaries, but not controlling toward others. Appreciation. We respect ourselves. We feel gratitude for our talents and our positive experiences. We also understand that times life has been hard for us. We look for ways to find the kernels of value in any of our experiences, no matter how difficult or unresolved they may be. To appreciate is to cherish. We can, for instance, cherish the hidden, scared part of us. Then it relaxes and lets go into wholesome excitement, the gold kernel in any fear. Appreciating rather than self-blaming helps this happen. Affection. We feel a caring connection to our shadow side. We don't see it as an enemy, but as a child within that is living in a nightmare. We hold that vulnerable part of ourselves and assure our frightened self that we offer adult protection, trustworthy and enduring. The unloved shadow becomes more secure when it feels included. Such security and inclusion automatically release the creative powers and gifts of our shadow side. Allowing. We allow ourselves to face our own darkness. We walk directly into the dense woods within us. Gradually, we make friends with the forest creatures and the overarching trees of gloom that terrified us all these years. We feel free now to walk through the valley of the shadow because our adult self is with us. Now the creatures that seemed so fierce are tamed. The trees that originally seemed ominous give us purchase to spiritual heights. Thus, all about us can be transmuted into the gold of Big Mind, who we are beyond ego, once we acknowledge and befriend it. Big Mind means big heart, too. Shin is the Chinese word, and Chitta is the Tibetan word, meaning both mind and heart. What we might see as a combination of mindfulness and loving-kindness. As we heard before, love, especially shown by the 5 A's, is the fast track to taming and gentling ego. We notice the direct connection between growing in love and letting go of ego in A Romance on Psalm 137, the poem we noted earlier by St. John of the Cross. Love is working in me so strongly that whether things proceed well or badly for me, love turns everything into a sweetness that is transforming my soul. Now, in the joyous flame of love, which I feel to be so alive within me, swiftly and with nothing spared, I, ego, am being completely dismantled. The conditioning is gradually shaken loose, and the ego exposed in its bankruptcy. This marks the entrance into the divine realm of essence, where grace and mercy begin descending into consciousness, dissolving more and more ego boundaries. Now, ego does not need to be slain. One does not have to wage war against ego, conquer or destroy it. Ego cannot but melt. It cannot but bow and surrender at beholding the magnificence and majesty of reality. A. H. Almaas, The Elixir of Enlightenment. Practice. New directions. We go to a website and then are instantly redirected to its updated version. We can use that same style in our work on ourselves. We can work with our automatic standby reflexes by redirecting them to a new version. This is a very simple technique, but it takes continual awareness to remind ourselves to practice it. As we continually redirect our self-talk and reflexes, we lay down new neural pathways that rewire our brain. We move from old reactions to new responses. Let's look at 5 examples of habit reaction that can turn into healthy practices. 1. Debate and win. 2. Pass judgment. 3. Be driven or stopped by fear. 4. Hold grudges and maintain resentment. And 5. Engage in retaliation. In each instance, we redirect our reaction so that the ego element is reduced. 1. From the need to win to cooperation. The egotistical style in a relationship is to debate and win. Instead, we can give the gift of being right to our partner. We can let go of having to be right in favor of what nurtures the bond. Winning becomes unnecessary and even immature as a goal in a relationship. We want to find ever more useful ways to collaborate in the building of the relationship. That becomes more important than proving we are right. As soon as we notice our attachment to winning, we redirect it to cooperation. 2. From judgment to compassion. Regarding judgment, we can train ourselves to notice when we are censoring or criticizing others' behavior. Then, in the instant in which we catch ourselves doing it, we switch our judgment thought over to the feeling of compassion. Then, the feeling may expand to include insight and a plan for action. For instance, we look down on someone on the street because of how shabbily he's dressed. We switch to feeling compassion for his poverty. This includes awareness of our own spiritual poverty. It also includes a smile of contact with him. We can also acknowledge our part in or our connection to what we have judged. Thus, our compassion will also include an awareness of our complicity in a society that thrives on wide disparities between haves and have-nots. We don't blame or judge ourselves for this, but simply notice it and, if possible, perform a gesture that aligns with our realization. In this instance, we might make a donation to a soup kitchen, volunteer in one, or vote for a candidate who promises positive societal change. 3. From fear to gratitude. Likewise, when we notice ourselves scanning for something to fear, or fearing something we know is not really a threat, we redirect ourselves to gratitude for something similar to it. For instance, I suddenly feel afraid I'll get a bad report from the medical test I just took. I notice the fear and switch my focus to something about my health I can be grateful for. This is remedying a negative reaction with a positive response. 4. From resentment to joy. If we feel resentful, we can redirect to something to be happy about in the relationship. Joy is the antidote to resentment because we thereby let go of our ill feeling or ill will. We desire the happiness and success of the other. Resentment is unresolved anger that holds on to a grievance. It usually leads to passive-aggressive behavior. We may feel resentment all through life, but we don't have to act on it anymore. Instead, we say ouch and reinvest our resentments into ever more novel forms of forgiving love. All 5 of these challenges take imagination, the organ of freedom from habit. 5. From retaliation to seeking reconciliation. Our impulse, when we're hurt or disrespected in any way, may be instant retaliation. We wish for the downfall of the other rather than for her happiness and success. We can instead pause to say ouch and attempt a dialogue and reconciliation. We may seek redress, but not revenge. We let go of retaliatory wishes and want the enlightenment of the other, whether or not he's willing to reconcile. This is the response of loving kindness, always the same as letting go of ego. At first, this practice may simply take the form of words. For instance, we are judging and we say, "Let me open to compassion." Gradually, as we practice this over and over, the real feeling will emerge from the aspiration. Sincere intention leads to feeling and then to action. Giving in to impulses, such as insistence on being right, judgment, fear, resentment, and retaliation, disempowers our self-worth. In this redirecting practice, we create a pause between the habitual reaction and a wholesome alternative. For instance, quick to judge contempt becomes pause and awaken compassion. This increases our sense of ourselves as free from old habits in favor of showing more love. That is how self-worth develops. Likewise, we benefit from this redirection style because we widen ourselves. Judgmental people suffer from the narrow bandwidth of acceptance they have for others. When we feel compassion, our breadth of acceptance expands. This makes love more possible. Fear narrows our options. Gratitude expands them. Resentment narrows our toleration level. Joy opens it. Retaliation narrows our access to satisfaction. Reconciliation, or letting go, enlarges it. We also bear in mind that no matter how much we practice, there can be moments in which any of the untransformed elements in us still blurt themselves out. Then all bets are off. We have forgotten our practices and come at others from ego. The practice then is to apologize and make amends to those we have hurt. We commit ourselves to be more vigilant about our reactions in the future. This style makes us a little less likely to fall prey to ego next time. The practice also includes compassion toward ourselves because we're not putting ourselves down for our lapses. In fact, we grow in respect for ourselves as we see how fully committed we are to our program of change. As an aside, we can also remind ourselves that our caregivers were slated by nature to show us how to have all 5 of the qualities we redirect to. If they did not do that, a spiritual practice can fill the gap. This one of redirecting does just that. Spirituality does not take the place of our psychological work, looking at our childhood, feeling what is appropriate to what happened to us, resolving our unfinished business with the past to whatever extent possible. But spirituality does help us find ways of being in the world as upright, compassionate people. Our spirituality thereby has parented us and readied us to parent the world. The wonderful results of taming. A lovesick nightingale among owls. You caught the scent of roses and flew to the rose garden. Rumi. In this poem by Rumi, we might see the owls as symbolic of egos, the rose garden as the domain of the higher self. The scent we catch is our realization that the ego we think we are is not all that we are. We realize by a stroke of grace, caught, not caused by us, that letting go of egotism can help us flourish as the spiritually alive beings we truly are. Then we look into all the nooks and crannies, in ourselves, in our relationships, in our life, where ego-centeredness still conceals itself. We do not have to go on a search and destroy mission against our ego. Rather, we want to shed the light of compassion on our ego and all its little ways of deceiving us. We are taking the unruly ego by the hand and showing it how easy it can be to make love its priority. We move from self-interest to noticing the needs of others. We nightingales now take the owls with us to the rose garden. We are not shaming our ego or humiliating it in this process. We are teaching it to trust reality rather than run from it. We are showing our ego how to stop congratulating itself with its successes at grasping and controlling. We are giving it a new face, not based on self-inflating, but on self-emptying. The toddler gimme has to become I share. The egotist's style of grab and cling becomes opening and giving. Generosity is our antidote to the old ego's avarice. We show attentive compassion to this misdirected attitude. It is not an enemy within that has to be routed or rooted out. It is a bewildered vagrant who needs to be shown the way home. We do not destroy the dragon of ego, only tame it. Dragons symbolize our powers beyond ego. A feature of the heroic journey is always the battle to tame the dragon within ourselves and then incorporate its power. We do not kill our ego, only let it be transformed into what it is meant to be. The archetypal theme of death and rebirth, when applied to our journey from ego to our true nature, is like the caterpillar's journey after all. When ego is up and running, it walls off access to other domains of our psyche. As our defenses loosen, new powers come into view. They were in us all along, but our egotism did not allow us to know or use them. It is our wholesome ego, in concert with our true nature, that does help us loosen. It shows how a strong but respectful assertiveness can replace aggressiveness. It shows how self-care can include caring about others. It shows how relinquishing center stage can place us in a holding environment that gives much more comfort and safety than controlling ever can. This is what letting go of an egotistical attitude really does. We adopt a new, more enlightened attitude. We were once driven by fear of reality, so we lived in illusion. Now, we can accept the givens of life and relax into them. We no longer have to make decisions that protect our pride of place. We are beyond the reach of threat or risk. Letting go means going beyond, just what it takes for a journey to begin. To surrender our ego, as in the beginning of any journey, is to die a little. A big part of what has sustained us is extinguished. We've let go of our belief in our own invulnerable solidity. We've uncovered and exposed our house of cards with all its inadequate hiding places. We have looked into our built-to-last armory, only to discover that its weapons are outdated. We have found out that there is nothing permanent or reliable about our fortress of ego. But we discover all this with jubilation because we no longer have to be on sentinel duty, no longer have to be on the lookout. We can let go of defenses because we have embraced the kind of defenselessness that frees us from fear. We are no longer afraid to be second instead of first, sometimes wrong instead of always right, generous instead of self-centered. In letting go of ego, we feel the serenity of having nothing left to lose or guard. We are face to face with the frank reality of life. In other words, we are truly sane. We are facing reality rather than saving face. Once we have removed the masks that protect that face, we feel our vulnerability, but for the first time, safely. It is not the one that keeps us afraid, but the one that opens us. We can relate to the pain that arises in relationships or life in general. Now, we can hold that pain. The whole process is scary, but that scare is an indicator that our ego is letting go. We are not regressing, we are evolving. Another result of letting go of egotism is softening our attitudes toward people we may have taken for granted or found difficult in such a way that we see another side to them. We begin to recognize how some unpleasant people are suffering in their own lives and then feel compassion toward them. We soften also when we come to notice an element of love in people's motives, even though they came across as cantankerous at times. Here's a personal example of softening. I found myself in a reverie one day, thinking back on my teachers in public grammar school. They were mostly what were called old maids, whose lives revolved almost entirely around their work. It occurred to me that teaching and forming us children had become their life purpose, a kind of ministry. They had dedicated themselves to helping us learn and grow. For the first time, I appreciated them at that level. I saw and see how they cared. I felt and still feel a warmth in this realization, a gratitude, too. I see all this as a grace given to me, a direct result of letting go of some of my ego judgments. The untamed ego sits imperiously at the head of the table of the psyche. When we let go of egotism, our psyche becomes a round table. Our ego is surrounded by archetypes, each offering violently primitive or lovingly evolved choices. There is Stalin and Gandhi. There is Hitler and Mother Teresa. There is Pol Pot and Martin Luther King Jr. They are no longer individual sinners and saints. As archetypes, each is a positive or negative shadow side of ourselves, what we can be at our best or worst. Each offers us a choice about how to act toward others. When we choose loving kindness, we act from the best in us, our enlightened true nature. When we choose malice, we act from the worst in us, our aggressive ego-centeredness. What we call ourselves is a product of these choices we make. Life is an experience of flow. When we hold on to ego beliefs, we do not flow. We stand firm and push against the dares that can help us grow. Egotism keeps us from the journey experience. We can't move, only maintain. We interrupt this growth-paralyzing inclination when we choose what makes us more loving over what keeps us on top. Our values have changed from immediate gratification to caring connection. This shift is a grace. Our practices are our follow-up and our thanks. In the Vinaya Mahavagga, the god Brahma asks the newly enlightened Buddha to become a teacher so he can share what he has realized. Buddha's response is described this way. In compassion, he contemplated the world with enlightened eyes. When we let go of ego, we have found a form of enlightenment. Our joy then makes us want to share with others how good it feels to be free of ego attitude. We can begin to do this by having a discussion about the change in us with those we love and trust. We can ask them if they notice a change in us. When someone acts in an ego-centered way toward us, we can tell of the joy we found in the egoless alternative. For instance, we see someone trying to get back at us for an offense. We can say, "I know you're angry. Let's talk about it and find a way to reconcile. I would rather make amends than see you be compelled to retaliate." We end this chapter on a humorous note. Diego, now in recovery from egotism, wrote this poem to his former wife as an amends for being so vindictive during their divorce of years ago. After you broke up with me, this fine-feathered ego was just too stuffed to eat crow. Your choice to use this device, ego, enables it to endure. Helen Schuckman, Course in Miracles. Chapter 7. Honoring Our True Nature. Your true face is a great jewel forming in heaven. How long have you awaited timelessness? This auspicious day, today, knows the increasing light of opportunity. Ehe Dogen Zenji, Treasury of the True Dharma Eye. Infinite riches in a little room. Christopher Marlowe, the Jew of Malta. A simple way to know that we are more than ego, more than we think, is to notice what happens to us when we hear music that we love. We are transported to a transcendent realm. Ego attitude has vanished in that moment. We suddenly feel that we are more, and that there's another world beyond what our mind can construe. This is what transcendence means, a sense of there being more in the world than what the senses meet up with, a going beyond what was before, a reaching further into the well of meanings than was ever possible by the skills of thought or logic, a going past the bolted gates of habit and limited imagination. Our true nature, the dimension of our psyche that transcends individual ego identity, is also sometimes called the archetype of the self, akin to Buddha nature, God within. The marvelous world we see around us can likewise be understood as having that very same transcendent quality. This was Buddha's realization upon being enlightened. When the morning star appeared, not only I, but the great earth, with all its beings, simultaneously became Buddhas. Jung, on the archetype of the self, speaks of the archetype of the self. Something strange to us, and yet so near, wholly ourselves and yet unknowable, a virtual center. I have called this center the self. Intellectually, the self is no more than a psychological concept, a construct that serves to express an unknowable essence which we cannot grasp as such, since by definition it transcends our powers of comprehension. It might equally be called the God within us. In egotism, the ego assumes the powers of that God within. It denies any reality beyond itself. Thus, the hauteur of ego is ultimately a loss of access to spirituality. Our true nature is the link between individual uniqueness and oneness. We are here as originals to be unique and to inhabit this individual body-mind. Thus, what we call higher self, true nature, God, and so forth, is alive today in a John way, a Jane way, in a horse way, a star way, a summer way, a rain way, a joy way. Humankind, like the higher self, is one single holding environment for all us diverse manifestations of itself. This was expressed well by Sri Aurobindo in Thoughts and Glimpses. Existence multiplied itself for sheer delight of being. It plunged itself into trillions of forms so that it might find itself innumerably. Individual identity gained special focus in Western culture during the Enlightenment because it was considered the basis for human rights. However, we needed the help of spiritual teachers to remind us to balance our individuality with commonality. We are in our natural, spiritual element when our ego moves from egocentric to omnicentric consciousness, as we saw in Buddha's words above, not only I, but all. It is, of course, totally normal to be centered on ourselves. We are the most complex of all the animals or things in nature. The more complex a being is, the more awareness it needs. To achieve this awareness, we have to focus on ourselves. So, our consciousness of ourselves requires self-centeredness. The problem is that we sometimes do so at the expense of others. This is where egotism rears its head. Selfishness can be described as a devotion to ourselves, an overemphasis on our interests, welfare, advantages, or gains, without regard for those of others. We all occasionally, or often, notice that our motivations and behavior can be selfish. Any one of us can become aware of an abiding, pervasive selfishness lodged deep within us, so subtle, so sly. This is ego at high pitch. Yet we do not put ourselves down or become discouraged. Instead, we first examine our motivations and behavior to locate our me-first attitudes. We open to compassion about that fact toward both ourselves and others. Then, we work on transitioning from self-centeredness to mutuality by following the practices in this audiobook. It's a long, hard climb, but if we remain on the lookout and sincerely want to be more altruistic, the transition will happen. Finally, in a practice like this, it is wise to ask for grace, assistance from powers beyond ego, always eager to join in on an enterprise that leads to more love. Can I indeed change my vision of who I am? Can I let go of my sense of my identity as a self-enclosed unit, gratifying myself at any cost? Can I let go of my preoccupation with myself as central and sole? The alternative is to see my ego simply as the most recent and local version of my identity, through which a greater life wants to express itself. For this to happen in any of us, we have to sacrifice ego supremacy, abdicate the throne on high, and be who we wholly are. Real freedom is in commitment to the designs and purposes of our depth reality, the bigness that beckons us beyond what ego can achieve or even imagine. We are here to join the evolutionary momentum of the universe. We don't escape ego for this to happen, only join it to a larger purpose than can be outlined by any of our individual needs. We do all this when we live with integrity and loving kindness, when the ultimate purpose of our life is to co-create a world of justice, peace, and love. We do this in a variety of ways. We let go of our ego-centeredness in favor of respect for the equality of others. We then move from arrogance to humility. We move from entitlement to reasonable protection of our rights, but without retaliation if we can't secure them. We move from aggressiveness to assertiveness, from defensiveness to honest self-presentation. In short, we move from ego posturing to our true upright posture. The most accurate name for our true nature, as we heard earlier, is flow. Our true nature is what is able to flow with what is, moment by moment, continually surrendering to reality, no matter how ruthless its onslaught or threatening its shape. We continually make room for all that comes our way because of this fearless quality of our being, this true nature that can receive everything, let go of everything, notice the dust in everything, but also see the glory in everything. Our true nature is the many-splendored reality of us and of all that is. When King David wrote in Psalm 139, "Lord, I praise you because I am wonderfully made," did he have an inkling of this egoless greatness? Our true nature wants to make a personal appearance. It peeps out at us from beyond ego in moments of unplanned kindness from, or to us, in epiphanies that happen to us from a spiritual source, and in the awe we feel in nature. For instance, beholding Yosemite reduces ego. Our response is wonderment and gratitude that it exists, that we lived to see it. Now we understand why St. Francis put the question of who he was, not to himself, but to God. That is, to his true nature, the divine within. Lord, who am I? Who are you? That question about true nature has only one answer. Divinity, humanity, and nature are all one reality. We all have the capacity to attribute our identity to a transcendent source. We might also feel that this source is personal, that it knows and loves us. This releases us from having to reboot our own ego grandiosity so frequently. Instead, we feel worthy just as we are. Then, the 5 A's become ways of feeling loved by a higher self, God, a higher power than ego, a divine life that dwells in us and around us and attends to us fully each instant, accepts our vulnerability with unconditional regard, appreciates our ego with all its fears, affectionately holds us in the embrace of unconditional love, and allows us the freedom to choose to be who we are more and more. A surrender we welcome. Our style is not to kill off our ego, but to escort it to its true identity. Letting go of an ego attitude is letting go of a mistaken identity. That mistaken identity is all we surrender. We then have a well-tuned ego, attuned to the serene center of ourselves, where love reigns and freedom rings. Indeed, our scared ego wants to enter the service of our true nature. It wants demotion for spiritual promotion. Once it knows what a wonderful alternative that is, compared to constant fight and flight, it feels right at home. It does not go to its true home kicking and screaming. Once ego knows what awaits it in the higher self, it springs into its arms. This is what it always needed, but its fear was so great that its awareness of its home and the path to it were blocked. Our larger life beyond ego is a resource in us and everywhere around us that sustains us when our ego enters its service. Not even the craftiest super salesmen of ego are a match for the magnetic attraction of our true nature. What most effectively triggers the ego personally or collectively to empty itself? When the current vision has become unbearable, the ego will be ready to observe a curfew. Usually, ego has to pump itself up to full inflation before it can begin to shrink to reasonable size. Sometimes, only hitting bottom does the trick. In a defeat of ego control or ego grandiosity, we see how small the ego really is, and how ineffective it is in helping us when the chips are down. Then we realize the inadequacy of the old model of personality. I am all it. Then it's natural to turn to something that can be more reliable. We find that in our higher self, in our true nature beyond ego. We see this in 12-step programs as reliance on a higher power, the unexpected resource, waiting to help us. Emptying the archives of our egotistical resources, greed, division, narcissism, reveals a new identity, the evolved one that awaits us so expectantly. The limited ego has to be unshackled so it can surrender and open to that future. The breakdowns that make this happen are spiritual graces. A new set of possibilities easily emerges from the rubble of our archaic habits. Now we see a new future, one that the old ego could not imagine, didn't have the requisite tools to design, since its focus was on self-preservation and self-advancement. A dismissing of the old guard ego will feel like descent into danger, because it is all we ever believed kept us safe. The unenlightened ego seeks only ascent, especially in standing or accomplishment. We thereby overlook the crucial phase of the journey, the descent into the darkness, the sense of homelessness, the mood of exile. Descent is loss, the atmosphere of grief. Yet this is our doorway to something beyond ego. It is the higher self, the teacher of our soul that we meet so surely in the dark.